It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and joining us for Theology of the Body Thursday is, as always, Cindy Black, our Executive Director here at Redeemer Radio. Thanks for being here, Cindy.
Yes, good morning.
You wanted to start, before we get into the Theology of the Body topic, you wanted to start with a message?
Yeah, just looking at how we receive our programming. You know, we have local programming, which we have a lot of fun creating and producing, and we can approach topics in a way that we've decided is the best way for our listeners. But then we receive programming from EWTN and Ave Maria. And sometimes the way a topic is presented doesn't necessarily reflect Redeemer Radio's approach to evangelization and sharing God's truth and love. Mm-hmm. And it's not always the program host that doesn't present it that way. They don't have control necessarily over how their guests and the people they're going to interview express ideas. We try to approach topics in a way that is pastoral and encouraging to living our faith and to sharing the gospel truth. And sometimes the content isn't presented in that way. And sometimes I don't present the ideas that I want to in a good way. You know, we all fall short of kind of the ideal of how we cover things.
Especially with live radio afterwards, a lot of times you say, I wish I would have said it this way.
Yes,
but,
yeah. And the coverage of the clergy sex abuse scandal really can fall into this category. There are a lot of conversations about what the root cause of the scandal is and the role that homosexuality plays in that. Mm-hmm. And while it's important for us to look at root causes and other contributing factors, we really have to take great care not to generalize or to have an us versus them mentality in how we're presenting the gospel, because that's the antithesis of the gospel. Every human person is a child of God, regardless of their beliefs, regardless of their actions. That doesn't make them not our brothers and sisters. So I was thinking about the theology of the body, and really the theology of the body provides a way to talk about what the root cause to this scandal is. And basically it comes down to it's that each human person is called to make a sincere gift of ourselves to every person that we interact with. St. John Paul II calls this the disinterested gift of self. Not disinterested in the way of we're just apathetic, but disinterested in the way that we're not seeking our own interest.
Okay.
We're not worried about how is this going to benefit me or what am I going to gain by this, but rather what can I give? How can I affirm the person in front of me and treat them as the holy, sacred thing that they are, rather than an object for myself?
Right.
So that's really the root of this scandal, is the failure to live that self-gift, putting sexual desires or power or gratification at the expense of the other person. So reducing the other person as an object to receive something for myself, something pleasurable to myself.
Yeah, so it kind of goes beyond any specific temptation or anything, but I think you're in some ways broadening it to abuse being any time that we use another person.
Right. And then in this case, with this sexual abuse, we know that our sexuality, it goes to the core of our being, and that's why we should be so outraged at this, because it affects the body and the soul of the person that it's perpetrated on. That person is to be loved and cherished, not used as an object of gratification. Especially when I think about the cover-up, as horrifying it is to read the cases of priests that have abused children, or ex-Cardinal McCarrick, who used his power on adult seminarians. Those things are horrifying. But then the next step is, how did this keep happening, or how was McCarrick able to rise to power? Those that didn't even perpetrate the sexual abuse, looking at the root of what kept them quiet or why this was allowed to happen can also be seen as a lack of disinterested self. So a failure to put the good of another to be self-gift, regardless of how it impacts us. And I just think of the implications of prestige, power, or even fear of retribution or something like that. So if you have somebody speaking up about an abuse and it's not dealt with by calling law enforcement and removing that person and, launching an investigation, what keeps that from happening is really a failure to love, a failure to be disinterested self-gift that we're all called to be. So I think that the Theology of the Body really gives us the challenge to look at that failure and for all of us to strive to live that notion of self-gift.
So I think a lot of times we might just call it sin and might not be as detailed as what you're saying here. But how do we get beyond that? I guess, what is the remedy for this, for our society? And I suppose at some level we accept some of it and maybe even glorify some of this using another person in some aspects of society. But then obviously everybody would draw a line at some point saying, no, this is abuse now. So maybe would you say that there's a spectrum or a gradient between this type of using another person?
Absolutely, yes.
And it's maybe crept farther and farther to allowing and tolerating abuse in different areas of life?
I'd have to ponder that a little bit more. Yeah. Basically, all deviant sexual behavior by definition reduces the human person to an object of use.
Okay.
The only expression of our human sexuality that doesn't do that is a husband and wife together being open to life and, coming together in unity. That anything outside of that falls into that. So, it would be a continuum because even spouses can have ulterior motives or be seeking self-gratification and things like that and have to constantly be battling that. But when we see the repeated, blatant, horrific details, this was, in most of these cases, it wasn't just a priest and one person that they really wanted to be self-gift with, but it was inappropriate because of their vow of chastity. In most of these cases, it really had very little to do with the other person. It really was about self-gratification and about power.
Mm-hmm. We're talking with Cindy Black here for Theology of the Body Thursday and discussing how it's this lack of thinking of ourselves as self-gift and starting to use another person that turns into abuse if it wasn't abuse from the very beginning. And you bringing in the idea of a married couple, and even within there could be use and abuse, even for the best intended of couples. We're not perfect.
Right.
And so at some point, I feel like we're talking about maybe a couple different levels here of the abuse, and then I think what society would find more acceptable is consensual, maybe use of one another.
Yeah. It's a warped. It starts getting very warped. It's okay as long as I'm using you and you're using me, and anytime we reduce the person to an object, there's going to be destructive implications. And I want to turn back to that notion of a married couple, because I think there can be tendency in our discussions to fail to acknowledge that we have brothers and sisters with same-sex attraction who strive to make themselves self-gift, to offer their time, talent, and treasure for the sake of other people bettering their lives and things like that. And then there are heterosexuals who manipulate and use people as objects of their own sexual gratification. So we can't say that the root cause of this is homosexuality, the root cause of it is failure to be self-gift. Otherwise, we wouldn't see people who consider themselves homosexuals to be living self-gift well.
Right. And that's getting back to your initial point of trying to blame this on one particular group of people or type of person or one particular tendency or temptation, that it really varies. And we've seen all kinds of different situations, and we don't want to lump together a whole group based on the actions of a few. We don't want to blame all priests for the actions of a few priests. We don't want to blame all of those with same-sex attraction for the actions of a few who are abusing others, and realize that within all of these different areas, all these different groups of people, there are those that are striving to make good choices. There are those that are making very poor choices. And there's a spectrum in between of people that are maybe misguided and making poor choices here and there. And we want to encourage all those, no matter heterosexual or homosexual, no matter if they're clergy or lay people, to live a life of holiness and live a life of self-gift.
Right. And that's what we continually have to be striving for. And that's why prayer and the sacraments and learning about things like theology of the body and learning why God created us the way he did and embracing that, that's going to bring ultimate fulfillment. That's the paradox of the self-gift, that when we seek the good of another, it in turn brings about our good. When we're less interested in ourself, we become a more fulfilled self.
In giving, we receive.
Amen.
And yeah, I think that's another one of those things where we see the fruits. Like if we start analyzing, if you did a study of people that are generous, you find that they're happier people. Or you find, if you analyze people that were living out that life of self-gift, you would find, and we see this in the saints, a joy that's present in those people that maybe some of us don't have, and we're seeking and maybe looking for joy in the wrong places sometimes.
Yes.
So, all right. Well, thank you, Cindy, for another great Theology of the Body Thursday. Reminder, if people have suggestions, they can let us know for questions about theology of the body or topics that we could relate to theology of the body. We're open to that, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, Cindy.
Thank you.